Okay, I'm a little confused because I don't know what the hell George is doing a 3% withdrawal rate because that's absolutely wrong. I'm going to have to find out where that video is and get it taken down because that's just wrong. You don't need to have a 3% withdrawal rate. That's ridiculous. Or I hope you misunderstood. I hope we didn't put out trash like that.
Was it 4 to 5%?
No, it shouldn't be 4 to 5%. It ought to be more than that. I mean, if you're making 12 in good mutual funds and the S&P is average 11.8, and if inflation for the last 80 years is average 4%, if you make 12 and you need to leave 4% in there for inflation raises, that leaves you 8. So I'm perfectly comfortable drawing 8. But if you want to be a little bit conservative, 7, but sure not 5 or 3.
This is disgusting. Do you understand what he's saying, folks? 12% is the average rate of return. I'd like to know, where is that product that gets 12% every single year religiously? It doesn't exist. What Dave's doing here is extrapolating what a lot of us do, because our minds think linearly. They don't think so. If the broader stock market averages are somewhere more between 7 and 10%, that's not 7 every year. It's at 7 as an arithmetic mean. But what he's doing is actually, this right here is a weapon of financial misinformation. And maybe he doesn't mean it that way, but there is no way that an 8% withdrawal rate is safe. There have been numerous studies by Wade Fow where he posed a 1.9% safe withdrawal rate. William Bengen talks about a 4% safe withdrawal max rate. He was the founder of the 4% rule in what's called the Trinity study. Nobody should be taking 8% of a retirement plan unless you want to literally spend all your money and be broke in retirement, which sounds like a great idea, Dave.
If you're making 12% and inflation is 4 and you leave 4 in there, so your nest egg grows by 4, it's simple. 8 is what's left over. So if you got $1 million and you leave 4% in there, that's $40,000. Okay, so you now have $1,040,000. So the next year you get a rate of return of 12%, 11.5% on the $1,040,000, and the next year it'll be $1,090,000.
What is he doing? He's assuming you're making 12% every year. That doesn't exist. If a 12% mutual fund existed, sign me up right now. But there is no way that the SEC would let anybody advertise that they're making 12% every year, because it's not true. It is not. Now, there might be the long-term. What is the long-term equity returns on the S&P? Well, we can just Google this. And by the way, that doesn't account for fees, doesn't account for taxation. So if we go here and we go long-term equity returns, the Chicago Center for Price Research, according to NerdWallet, James Royal and Ariel O'Shea, they say the average stock market return is about 10% per year for nearly the last century, as measured by the S&P index. But the S&P index was down like 20% last year. It's not a static rate of return. And people are giving that type of advice. In fact, according to stock data from macrotrends.net, and data here is intended solely for informational purposes, not for trading purposes, and also realize that you can't invest in the S&P 500 purely without having some index fund, which may have an expense ratio. They're usually low, like 0.04% or something like that. But the 5-year returns from 2018 to 2022 were 7.51%. The 10-year returns from 2013 to 2022 were 10.41. But the 10 years from 2000 to 2010, the market didn't do anything. It was flat. It was a lost decade for equity investors. The last 20 and 30 years, the average is more like 7.52% from 1993 to 2022 and 7.64% from 2003 to 2022. And that doesn't count fees. That doesn't count taxes. That doesn't count. That means you literally bought the index and never sold it for 30 straight years or 20 straight years, which means nobody ever does that. You got to pay for college. You got to pay for the first time home purchase. So the problem is he should really be using 7% return just to be a little more conservative on that estimate, not 12. Back in the day, I had heard it was some mutual fund that he used and he used the numbers from 1927, but this is ridiculous.
You do not need to live on 4% of your money for your nest egg to survive.
Yeah, even if you did a rate of return of 10% or something.
Yeah, and what it sets up is this guy now, he doesn't think he's got enough money. And he's already got $120,000 and he's 30 years old and he's on a plan. He's on a plan to be very wealthy and he's worried he's going to have enough money or not.
Yeah.
You know, because stupid people put out low withdrawal rates. Like
but
listen, if you think you can only pull off 4% off of investments making 12, where the flip is the other 8% going? Well, 4% of it went to inflation. That's where it went. The other 4% is just sitting there. So you are growing your investments instead of living off of them. I'm not destroying the nest egg. I'm not even touching the nest egg. I'm growing the nest egg by leaving 4% in there.
Yeah.
Taking 8 off of a 12 growth rate.
So go a 10% rate of return. Go a little bit more conservative with your rate of return. Go 10%. What would you do with 10%?
It's not more conservative. It is truth. I am looking at long-term equity returns for the last 30 years, 20 years. They're not 10%. They're 7.5%. And that doesn't account for fees. If you use a Dave Ramsey SmartVestor Pro, they're not doing this for free. If you use any fiduciary advisor, generally going to charge between 1 and 1.5% for something. But even if you had no fees taken out, that's 7.5%. So if you did the historicals and you started, so I'm looking right now at the S&P data, and my data is from large cap stocks, so Standard & Poor's 500 composite total return, including reinvested dividend. So S&P total return. So if you go 30 years back, which includes the gay 90s when everybody was happy and the market was booming, kind of like the roaring 20s, the mathematical average for those 30 years from 92 to 2021 was 10.65% net return after the gross return was 12.11. But if you account for the fact that you have losers and winners in there, 12.11 is reduced to 10.65%. Then if you factor in taxes, that's more. So if you add last year, which was bad, and you started in 1993, you go down from that 12 to 9.65%. No fees, no taxes. So the big fallacy here is a static rate of return being used and not, to say, hey, we're going to have a period like 2000 to 2022. 2000 to 2002, market was down negative 9.1, negative 11.89, negative 22.1, then positive 28, positive 10.88, positive 4.91, positive 15.79, positive 5.49, and then a negative 37. So that's 9.65. If you change that, by the way, and you say, well, we're going to start in the year 2000 and do the last 23 years, down to 6.26 as the net return. The arithmetic mean, that's also a big problem when people do these numbers. The arithmetic mean is the numbers averaged. The net return is what a dollar would have really earned. So you could have 100,000 that you put into an account and you lose 50%, you're down to 50 grand. You then make 100 grand to break even the next year. Your average is 25%, but your net is 0. That's the difference between average return and net return. And by the way, I didn't add an expense, which even an index fund would have an expense of like, let's say 0.04. That lowers it to 6.22. If you add an advisor in there, that's even less. Advisors have a valuable role in behavioral economics, behavioral finance, keeping you aligned with your plans. Vanguard did a study called Vanguard Advisor Alpha that said those advisors who use index funds do better than those who just use index funds with no advisors. That's from Vanguard, like one of the pioneers and leaders in index funds. Then if we go back to the S&P since 1928, which is where they get the long-term historical data, and if we go I don't know, 99 years out, that average, that's where they're getting the 12%. Because if you go from 1928 to where we have research compiled by University of Chicago based on the 94, 95 year history, that's, I guess, where he's getting 12% from if you do the numbers from 1928 to 2022. But who the heck has a 95-year time horizon? I don't. Do you? Give me a break.
Why are you going to underinvest?
Yeah.
I mean, this year, the S&P to date
was 10%.
Is 10%, and we're not even at the end of the year yet.
Yeah.
You know, and everybody's talking about how bad the economy is. So, you know, most years mine have done much better than 12. And so
But wouldn't you? But if you can do your standard of living though lower than what you need, like if you don't need
it, that's fine.
Yeah.
Like I'm 62, or 63, I'm pulling nothing off of mine.
Right.
Because I don't need it. I still work. I still have an income.
Right.
I don't need any of it. So it's all just sitting there growing.
But you could do 4%.
The problem is when you go down these stupid nerd rabbit holes in these Reddit threads with these morons who live in their mother's basement with a calculator, and then you put that out into the dadgum community, and then people go, I don't have enough money. It's hopeless. I'll never be able to save enough to retire. $1 million should create for you an $80,000 income, boys and girls. So you should, perpetually, like if forever, you should be able to pull $80,000 forever and never destroy it. Now and so when you tell people that $1 million creates a $40,000 income, you go, oh, I've got to have $2 million and I can't make that. Then this system doesn't work.
So what I did is I took $1 million, I added it to my geek living in their mother's basement, which I'm not, which I would find offensive. That was his employee. The guy's supposed to be the heir apparent to one of the, So what I did is I took $1 million, took $80,000 a year, and played it from 1928, which is that mythic period that he talks about. Guess when you would run out of money? 1939. Now you might say, well, we're not going to go through the 20s and 30s. Well, we live in uncertain times where World War could be upon us. But let's get a little more positive. And I'm going to start we'll use 20-year increments. And I'm going to start in 1948, period of robust economic expansion. It worked from 1948 to 1966. Dave's plan. If it was all in the market. But how many people, how many retirees put 100% of their money in the market? Nobody. Maybe you want to have 20% in cash. Maybe you want to have 40% in bonds, whatever it might be. Hedges. So what if you did, from 1928, you'd be broke. If you started this in 1928, you would be broke in 12 years. If you started in 1948, Dave's plan works. If you start at 1966, you are broke in 1983. So it depends on which period of time you are suggesting. That is why these geeks living in their mother's basement, although I don't live with my mother, I live with my wife in my house, pretty happy. But it depends on which 20-year increment. From 1986 to 2006, Dave's strategy worked. But from 2000 to 2020, the last 20 years, you'd be broke in year 11. So the idea is this type of irresponsible financial reporting has devastating consequences by unregulated financial media heads. And I'm not saying we should go regulate financial media types, but no fiduciary in their right mind would give this information or advice. They would give more advice like what George Camel talked about, not what Dave Ramsey talked about. So George Camel should be given a raise.
My money is actually invested exactly the way I teach people to invest it. And I'm easily making 12% on my money. Easily. Average throughout a decade.
Yeah.
So it's just asinine that we do this stuff. So no, honey, you need to save 15% of your income in baby step 4 till you get your house paid off. When your house gets paid off, you will increase your investing ratios above that. You are not going to retire poor. Stay away from 4% withdrawal rate morons who are telling you this is the thing. So God, it's just aggravating. So
I can see the hope ceiling.
Because it makes people think they need $2 million when they only need $1 million.
Yeah.
Or it makes them think they need $8 million when they only need $4 million.
Yeah.
And here's the end of the story is this. No one ever actually ends up ever with what you thought you were going to end up with.
Right.
Ever.
That's a good point. I have no problem with the last 3 points. A lot of the financial planning community is wired to make you feel poor. I get that. I want to give hope to the masses, but I don't want misinformation. So I don't have a problem with what he's saying here. Kind of makes sense. I have a problem with the use of a linear number, 12% per year, every year in some simple calculation, which the math will not hold up. I mean, did he flunk math?
Which is okay to do the projection.
Sure.
And you project out there and you go, okay, I'm going to have $1.7 million at this current rate. Yeah, but what you haven't factored in is between now and 35 years from now when you're 65, you're going to run into flying monkeys, wicked witches. Have you seen The Wizard of Oz? You're going to be on the yellow brick road sometimes.
And Glinda,
sometimes you're going to have
witch.
money drop in your hands
Who's great.
out of nowhere. You're going to make more money than you ever need. You're going to have ruby red slippers sometimes, and sometimes you're going to have flying monkeys stealing them. And at the end of the story, your little projection is not accurate. You're going to make usually most people end up with about 2x of what they thought they were going to end up with if they stay on their plan.
Right.
Most people do not end up with 2x. Who knows anybody? My parents end up with negative 2x. My dad got disabled. Yeah, I've been blessed, but I know many people, they get disabled, they get cancer, they have to pay for college, they lose their job in their 50s because they get pushed out of work and they weren't making what they ever did, and all that money that they were supposed to save in their 50s, they didn't. I do think there's a good point here about financial calculations are just that, they're projections. They never come exactly true. And there are different wealth eroders that could wage war. He uses the term flying monkeys. I actually like that. It's like a good analogy. But Glenda the Good Witch, not everybody gets Glenda the Good Witch. Most of the time, they get wealth eroding factors, taxes, inflation, disability, early death, whatever can go wrong will in many cases. And I do think for those who save religiously, 15%, I would agree with them. Those are the people that get lucky because they're not really lucky. They have ready money because they have low debt. So that I'm in agreement to. So you can agree with these talking heads, but also critique things that they say that's kind of dumb.
Here's another thing. Here's what happens between 30 and 65. Your income goes up almost every freaking year. Your income goes up. I mean, you think about what people made 40 years ago.
I don't agree with that. I would like that to be the case, but a lot of people are living paycheck to paycheck. A lot of people, they made 50 grand 10 years ago. They're making 50 grand this year. But it seems like he's been very blessed financially, and he's projecting that on his listener, which may or may not be the case.
When I started this show 30 years ago, the average household income in America was 40. You know what it is now? 73. That's average. And so if you're just average, your income's going to double. And if you're actually doing these nerd calculations, you're already above average. So, oh my God, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And I tell you, the financial industry and their moronic paralysis of the analysis pisses me off to no end.
So he talks about the average salary being 40 grand when he started out. I believe he started out about 30 years ago in 1992. If you take 30 years ago, what rate of return is 40 grand growing to 73 grand? Is that double? No, it's a 2.03% growth rate. So our expenses are going up exponentially. Our income is going up by 2%. That's the reality for most people. Not doubling your money every 10 and 10 years. I get it. If you are a long-term equity investor, inflation becomes a force for good rather than a force for bad. So be positive. But again, all of these geeks that he's talking about will actually govern his advice so that it's better advice for the general public. I'm Josh Jelinski, the Financial Quarterback. Hit subscribe. Follow me for more.